I haven't really made a video in a while, and since I got this new microphone, I mean, why not? And I was reminded of this story. I told it one time, didn't really make any illustrations for proper picture in your head. And I don't really think just describing it does any justice, but so about the day before Valentine's Day, had two phone conversations with two friends, and for some reason the paranormal got brought up on both of these occasions. Um, Now the story that always goes to my mind. Some people claim to have paranormal experiences. Other people just simply claim that they thought they had one. And there's one that has always really shook me. One that I'm gonna tell you again, with a better description and going into depth about what these things possibly are, what their intentions are, so on and so forth. This isn't really going to be a funny story. But if you laugh, that's okay. That's always great. But this is definitely in the top 10, if not one of the most scariest and most unexplainable experiences I've ever had in my life. So without further ado, let's begin. So before I even get into the story itself, the other day drew this thing out and scanned it to the computer, so have a look at my sketch. Now, this entity, one of the first things you'll notice is it's pitch black. Silhouette didn't even really have any three-dimensional features. It just kind of looked like a 2D, incredibly dark shadow. It was incredibly tall, even in a crouching state. It was easily 6 foot, 6'5". It could easily be 7 to more than 7 feet taller if it was fully erect. It didn't really have any joints. It didn't really have any definitive points of articulation except for the fingers. Its arms and knees were bent, but it looked kind of like a really poorly drawn cartoon where it just was curved instead of bent. And for some reason, about where the waist level is, and anything that was by the waist level down to about the middle of the knee, was covered in this black vapor type substance. It was just like this cloud that kept pouring out of this waist level of this body. The hands had it as well because the hands were quite long. It was very much monkey hands or arms. It didn't make any sound. It didn't have any stench, this substance that was emitting from its body. But perhaps the most disturbing feature was this thing's eyes that were just piercing bright red and couldn't be any larger in diameter than perhaps a dime or a penny. No other definitive features, really. It didn't really have a neck. The head just kind of met with the shoulders. And the only clothing, or at least what looked like clothing that this thing had on, was boots, and it looked almost like leather chaps for pants. Now, I know a lot of people, when describing encounters with these entities, often say they either dress up as cowboys or dress in robes, but the top half of this thing's body looked like it was in either a robe or it was just bare skin or whatever, and the bottom half looked like it had pants and boots on. And once again, this thing didn't make any noises. It never made any footsteps. It didn't leave a shadow behind it. This thing was just like almost as if it kind of sort of existed in the third dimension, but at the same time was almost undetectable unless you were, well, depending on the type of person you are, fortunate or unfortunate enough to see it. So this is really my shadow person story. I was 15 years old, and it was August 2012, and let me just disclose this information before we even get to any of the story. I wasn't on any psychoactive substances at the time. I was sober for at least 7 to 8 months at this point, and I wasn't sleep deprived. My sleep schedule was a little out of whack, but that's about it. So it's probably mid-August 2012, and I'm 15 years old. And I'm talking to a girl that was a friend of another girl that I was kind of into at the time, but that arrangement kind of turned sour. Um, Personal things I don't really want to get into. I might at a later date. I just don't know if I'm ready to divulge stuff like that. It's just a life-changing event. But I was talking to this girl's friend, and I was just frustrated as it was. So I pretty much just told her in the most polite way I knew to kind of fuck off. And I basically just said, I'm going to bed. I'll talk to you later. I'm in the living room at this time, too. And the couch is right at a handrail for the staircase to go downstairs. Our kitchen has two doorways to the kitchen, and I have a clear vantage point of both. I can see them from my location. One meets with the staircase going up to the loft, which is at the further end from where I was laying at this time. And the other one leads to the half bath upstairs and a little bend hallway that kind of leads into the kitchen dining room area as well. So I'm looking, and we always leave the light on to the furthest entrance to the kitchen, and I see this thing poke its head out. It's only maybe what I would say it's akin to maybe this much out of the doorway, but it was such a fast move that I wasn't sure if I actually saw something. I had to think to myself and actually question myself if I just saw something, or if I was just, playing tricks on myself, or maybe it was just a cat. It does it a couple more times, and I start to realize, okay, this isn't one of the cats. And then eventually it musters up the courage, or maybe it kind of assesses me as an easy target or whatever. It kind of does all the way down to right about here and kind of just looks at me for a second. Goes back in behind the doorway. And what happened next was just so unbelievable. It didn't walk like a human. It didn't walk forward. It did this weird wobble crab thing. If you've ever seen like Dr. Zoidberg from Futurama, think of that type of walk, but the hands aren't up in the air. They're kind of meeting the knees. But it happened so fast. And there was no sound. There was no footstep sound. There was no sound of movement. So at this point, it's just in front of the TV. The TV's off at this point. And I'm looking at it. And I kind of glance at the eyes real quick, but I didn't catch it right away. I'm still processing what the fuck this giant being that's kind of just materialized in my kitchen, and Zoidberg walks all the way to the fucking living room in supersonic speeds. What the fuck is this thing doing? Where the fuck is this thing from? And what the fuck does this thing want? Finally, I scan up and down its body once again, and I lock eyes with it, and what happens is, I don't know if you've ever held one of those like joke lighters or prank cell phones where you press the button and it zaps you. But it had shot something at me, or it had targeted something vital. And it was that sensation, but about double the strength. And it started just above where my stomach was and spread throughout all my limbs. And it took me about 2 seconds to realize that I can't move. This thing has fucking paralyzed me. And a lot of people, and I'll link some videos that I enjoy on the subject, They often go into detail how they'll wake up from sleeping and they'll be in paralysis states when they see these things. I don't think that it is sleep paralysis. I think it's honestly this thing's mechanism to stop you. So the only thing I could really have control over at this point are my eyeballs. For some reason, I can still move my eyes. I can't move my head, can't move my face, and I can't move my limbs. So I start scanning up and down this thing again, and it doesn't really do anything. It just kind of sits there in that same kind of crouching position and just looks at me. For some reason, I don't know if this thing relinquished its paralysis upon me. I don't know if I just had the mental strength to overcome whatever this thing did to me. But I mustered the strength to, and it was using the most force I've ever used in my life for such a menial task. It was almost like lifting weights to equate it to something. I could only move my shoulders and arms. I was groaning in pain trying to do this. I somehow was able to pull the cover over my head on this couch. Now, 2 minutes go by, and I tell myself that eventually I'm going to have to pull the covers away from my head. Now, starting when I was paralyzed, when I kind of realized I had been paralyzed, and in that point that we're at now, my frame of mind was that I was going to fucking die. And I was thinking over my 15 years at that point of my life on Earth, and how I'm probably going to leave Earth on such a sour note, a sour note to other people. So 2 minutes pass by, and I'm priming myself to rip the blanket from over my face and open my eyes and see a set of piercing red eyes about 2 inches away from my face, and this thing to just haul off and snap my neck. That wasn't the case, though. I had my fists balled up. I was ready to fight this thing to the death. I wasn't just going to let this thing kill me. I was going to fight somehow. I ripped the blanket off my face, and I opened my eyes, and to my amazement, this thing had vanished. I just remember collecting my thoughts for 20 seconds and just throwing the blanket over my head, because at that point I had full control of my body again. My body kind of hurt after that, though. It felt like slightly painful jello, and I really felt this really bad sensation in the middle of my kidneys, and I just fell asleep that way with a blanket over my head. I didn't want to get up and investigate. I didn't want to look up what had just happened to me. People ask me, why didn't you go chase this thing down if it was still in your house? We're talking about this being that just paralyzed me. I think this thing could probably kill me very easily and probably make it look like a suicide. Other than that, I have been so spooked. I don't know if this thing's energy is going to be remaining in my house. I don't know if this thing's going to come back eventually. I still don't know if it will come back or not. It could come back fucking tonight for all I know. But I didn't want any answers. At all. And I subconsciously, for the longest time, and due to other factors in my life, going through a court case, going through, petty high school teen drama and relationship sort of drama, it got kind of pushed to the wayside, and also it was such a frightening experience. It's not something you just want to think about the morning after, or, well, in my case, the afternoon after you wake up. And, you don't know how long that thing's going to be there. And I honestly think the thing that prevented me from researching this so long, with those other factors aside, was the fact that I knew for a fact this thing was trying to harm me, or do something. It did something to totally fuck my body up for a few seconds, and in my book, that's just malevolent. Okay, I shouldn't. If you're a decent being, you shouldn't be needing to restrict my body movements. But anyways, a lot of time goes by. Think of, I don't know, probably 2.5, 3.5 years later. I'm 18 years old. This is when I'm still making videos on my old bed. And it was January. It was like a mid-January day. It was in mid-January, but it was late at night. Probably the morning, early morning. And I had to go to bed because I needed to go to school. And at this time, I was pretty heavy into the occult, so I naturally listened to some pretty spooky or paranormal things before going to bed and would fall asleep to them. So, for some reason, this experience pops into my head for probably the first time since I was 16, 17 years old, and I decided to look it up on YouTube. And the videos I'll link into the description are the videos I watched that night. Now, one of them is a documentary on shadow people. It's pretty well done. The other is, it's videos, but it's segregated into little segments. I'm thinking this was posted before YouTube had unlimited time for uploads. And he brings in this Lakota sage, and they talk about exclusively the shadow people. And he calls this the Twisted Hairs Prophecy. And the Twisted Hairs Prophecy is basically a large group of different bands of Native American tribes got together. They had similar prophecies and just combined them into just one, I guess, Nostradamus-esque prophecy. And it has a segment that kind of categorizes and identifies these different types of shadow beings. And it also has a lot of tie-ins with extraterrestrials. So from what I've learned, first and foremost, these beings aren't ghosts. They're what are described as other dimensional beings. Some of them are different colors. Some of them are similar colors but aren't the same thing. It goes into detail about how there was a golden one that's your ancestral spirit, or an ancestor of yours, and that's like a benevolent protecting entity. One of them kind of camps out in the woods as what they describe as a defender of the trees, and it will just kind of follow you, but it's not aggressive. And I think he brings up other types. But the two types he brought up, one directed me directly, and the other directly affected my grandfather before he passed away. The first one, of course, he described as the one I saw. He said they feast off of negative energies, and that's usually when they materialize and visit you. And at this time, I had been kind of down in the dumps for multiple reasons for many months, and I bottled it up, and I just had this rage brewing inside of me, and it kind of makes a lot of sense that this happened. The other one, he says, wears a robe about 8 feet tall, has black wings, and this is basically what's commonly referred to as the Grim Reaper. And once he described it, I sat up in bed, opened my eyes, and just said out loud, "Oh my fucking God." Because he had just described to me what my grandfather was describing was appearing in his dreams for about 2 months before he finally passed. My grandfather's dreams 2 months before he passed always centered around him waking up in a hospital bed, and he looked to his left or whatever side it was on, and he'd see the visitation seats, the visitors in the chairs beside the bed, and it was his deceased wife, my Nana, who died 2 years prior, and a giant winged creature in a hood that would consistently tell him Ray, which is, well, not his name, but it was the name he went by. it's about your time to go. And he said he always wake up after that. And this Lakota man said, once that thing comes to you, your time's up. And it really freaked me out. And, you know, a lot of people like to brush this aside and tell me I was on drugs or whatever, but there's just too many tie-ins to things that have happened in my personal life to go inside of the realm of coincidence. It goes beyond the realm of coincidence for me. I truly do believe these things exist. I just don't know if we have the technology, or if we ever will have the technology to study these things and know what they truly are and why they even bother coming here in the first place. That's about it. Until next time.